intentar coordinar a gente tan complicada y con agendas tan complejas como la mayoría de los que estamos aquí, la verdad es que no resulta nada fácil. No me voy a extender. Esta sesión, dentro del programa general, va de evaluar a los estudiantes de grado quién y cómo. Es el título general de toda la mesa de hoy. Y yo voy a presentar primero al ponente y luego presentaré un poco, diré un poquito, nada, 2 palabras de los discursores y cómo va a funcionar el resto de la sesión. Pero creo que primero vamos a oír a Cees van der Vleuten, que es una de las eminencias, sorry Cees, I'm going to say in Spanish. Es una de las eminencias realmente en evaluación y en educación en general. Lleva trabajando desde el año 82 o antes en la Facultad de Medicina de Maastricht, que para todo el mundo que ha estado metido en educación médica ha sido una de las facultades punteras, sobre todo en Europa. Había otras en Estados Unidos y Canadá en aquella época, que se hicieron famosas por los programas que tenían programas basados en solución de problemas, problem-based learning que lo llamaban. De hecho, un poco ahí la Facultad de Medicina de Alicante, que fue una de las que empezó en España al principio, se inspiró bastante en el Maastricht, el McMaster, el McGill, en toda una serie de universidades que trabajaban en ese campo. Por supuesto, en aquella época no pudimos llegar a lo que llegaron ellos, ni lo intentamos y seguimos sin haber llegado. Vamos casi con 20 años de retraso en casi todas las facultades como con respecto a las otras. Pero vuelvo aquí si realmente en este momento es el director del Departamento de Desarrollo Educativo e Investigación de la Facultad de Medicina y Ciencias de la Vida, que si nos fijamos tiene una connotación, solamente el nombre, muy diferente del nuestro. Primero, es un departamento de desarrollo educativo e investigación en educación, en medicina y en ciencias de la vida, que ya no es nuestros departamentos de educación médica donde existen que se dedican a la gestión nada más. Además, es director científico, que también tiene otra connotación especial, de la Facultad de Educación de las Profesiones de Salud, que se dedica fundamentalmente a formar profesionales en posgrado y en educación médica. Y ha formado parte es asesor de muchas facultades, ha estado en el National Board of Medical Examiners en Estados Unidos, ha trabajado para las facultades más innovadoras de todo el mundo, Australia, Estados Unidos, por supuesto, en Europa, y por lo tanto realmente yo creo que es de las personas que más ha trabajado en educación médica, en investigación, en aplicación de la misma en todo el mundo. Y bueno, nos va a dar la lección de hoy hablando de evaluación programática de los estudiantes de medicina, en esta sesión estudiantes de medicina, y luego pues ya veremos un poco cómo seguimos con las preguntas y con lo demás. Cees, when you wish, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm deeply honored to be here in this nice historical site, very appropriate, the Lazaret. Wonderful to talk about medical education here. Well, I was nicely introduced. I was told to say something about programmatic assessment, and that's what I'm going to do. And after that, we'll have lots of space for questions. Okay? If you need more explanation, if I go too fast for you, please let me know, okay? Basically, I'm taking you through a voyage that I made myself in my professional career. I started in Maastricht University. We had a problem-based approach since 1974. We had a lot of emphasis on self-directed learning, and then we had a very traditional assessment system. And that was a conflict. And it took me a long time to resolve that conflict. And I'll talk to you about that. This is the overview. I will, look at the research that has been done in assessment in educational practice, and then derive some messages from it. And with these messages, we can think more theoretical about assessment. And once we have a model of assessment, then we can implement it in practice. And when we implement it in practice, we can then do research again in how and when it functions. That's what I'm going to do this afternoon with you. In assessment in medical education, is wide. We have a huge amount of tools. You're probably familiar with this competency pyramid, a very simple model of competency, and basically we've been climbing it over the last 50, 60 years. And we're now basically some 10 years already at the DOS level, where we wish to assess in real-life settings. And lots of instruments have been developed for that. All of these instruments you can study. You can study their characteristics. And typically this is done through all kinds of reliability and validity studies, or looking at other aspects of the instrument. And I will summarize some of that research. I will focus on the bottom three. I will look at validity, what are we measuring? I will look at reliability, how precise are we measuring? And then I will look at assessment and learning, and the effect of assessment on learning. In terms of validity, what are we assessing? I think the world is moving from an input model of a curriculum, so many hours of physiology, so many hours of anatomy, so many weeks in internal medicine, and so on and so forth, towards a more outcome-based model. So we define the outcomes. And then we look at the curriculum and how the curriculum can cater best those outcomes. It's a fundamentally different approach to education. We also went from teacher-oriented programs towards more learner-centered programs, where there's more focus on lifelong learning, self-directed learning, where the didactic model is moving away from the typical classroom situation or the lecture-based curriculum. I think this is worldwide, and if you look at the world, then they are defining the outcomes. Here are 3 outcome systems from the US, from Canada, and from the UK. And they have been developed a number of years ago with a lot of stakeholder input. What is it that future healthcare needs of our medical professionals? And this definition, I think, strikes me in a number of ways. Because if you look at these, then they're very similar. The kind of, hello, come in. Come in. Come in. So these competency systems are very similar, right? One, that really strikes me. Second thing that really strikes me is that they move beyond knowledge. Most of these competencies are not knowledge related. I saw you were holding up a document on values, on professionalism issues. These are the kind of skills that become more and more important. These are the more softer skills. Communication, professionalism, being able to work in a team, all of that. They are pretty important because we know that if things go wrong in clinical practice, these kind of skills are involved. Much more than knowledge-oriented skills. We also know that if things go wrong in clinical practice in relation to these skills, we could already have seen it in the undergraduate medical curriculum with the students. So we have an obligation, I think, to look at these kind of skills and train them. But how do you do that? How do you train these complex skills? You can't have a course on communication. I had the communication expert here in the room. You can't have a course on communication for a couple of weeks, then have, I don't know, an OSCE, stamp on it. You're a good communicator for the rest of your life. It doesn't work that way. These kind of complex skills are learned throughout a curriculum, longitudinally, right? Does Spain have a competency system? Yeah, you do? Okay. In the Netherlands, we've adopted the CanMeds, and it has structured all undergraduate and postgraduate education in the last 10 years. So there's a lot of emphasis on competency-based medical education, both at the undergraduate level and the postgraduate level. These are complex skills that are not easily to be assessed in an objective, standardized, I don't know, multiple choice test, right? Basically, you have to assess these skills through observation and through professional judgment, right? Basically, you have to assess these skills unstandardized in real life, right? It's nice to have a lecture on communication, but ultimately you have to communicate with the patient or with another team member. And you learn if you get feedback on that. So really, what we need to assess is with unstandardized assessment technology, using a lot of professional, holistic judgment. Right. Now, what we've learned from the research on all these validity studies is that there's no single magical bullet. There's no method that can do it all. We have introduced the OSCE, and we tend to think it can do it all, but it can't. Not a single measure can do it all. You need to cover the entire competency pyramid, basically. And we need both standardized assessment technology as well as non-standardized assessment technology. If you have a curriculum which only consists of standardized knowledge assessments, you're missing out on something. Then we've learned that with standardized assessment, a bit of quality control has a lot of impact on the validity. So if you set up reviews on developing, I don't know, stations or items for a multiple choice test, if you have peer review organized around that, it will have a major impact on the quality of the exams. In the Netherlands, we actually have a strategy for sharing items across schools, reducing the cost of producing good quality items. Why do we all have to have our own drawer with probably poorly written questions? Why don't we share? However, for the top of the pyramid, for non-standardized assessment, it's not so much quality control, it's all about the people doing it, right? If I would be a student and he would be my clinical supervisor, observing me seeing a patient, we'll sit down for a couple of minutes right after that encounter, and he'll give me some feedback. The feedback is not, Cees, you did this and this wrong. The feedback is questions. What were you thinking of? How was that organized in your head? Did you notice the reaction of the patient when you said this? How come, you think? What would you do differently the next time? Right? So the quality of the interaction determines, let's say, the validity of what you get. And the control, the quality control, is not so much in the instrument that he's using to give me feedback, but in the people, right? And here's also your headache. Because if you want to do a good job, you have to prepare the people to be able to do that. So staff development becomes really important. How do you give proper feedback in a clinical setting? Okay. These are some messages from validity. Let's switch to reliability. That is the precision with which we can measure. If I were to measure your length, and I have a ruler, and I would measure your length, and I would do it twice, I would expect a high correlation between the first measure and the second measure, right? That's reliability. We can express that in a figure, a reliability coefficient, which may vary from 0, no reliability at all, to 1, perfect reliability. They say that we need a reliability of 0.80 minimally for summative tests, for tests that have consequences, right? Now I'm going to show you a table of reliabilities of different methods of assessment, ranging all across Miller's pyramid. And it's expressed as a function of hours in order to make them comparable across different methods. You know, I can assess many more items in a multiple choice test in an hour than I can assess stations within 1 hour. And in order to make them comparable, we looked at testing time. Well, what do you conclude if you see this? What's your conclusion? Yeah, with more time, you get more reliability. And they're very similar. That's the second conclusion. That's the second conclusion. But let's start with the first. You need at least some 3 to 4 hours of testing time in order to get a reliable result. Or yet in other words, our educational tests in actual educational practice are not so reliable. Meaning that we will make many false positive and false negative decisions simply because of noise in the measurement, right? So this is bad news. This has been documented time and over again in a zillion studies. What is behind it is that our performance is contextually bound. If you change the context, our performance often is very different. And because of that, you need many contexts. You need a wide sample in order to arrive at the precise score. But most of our tests in educational practice are not very reliable. But there's also good news in this slide. That is, there's no inherent method which is more reliable or less reliable. Or yet in other words, more subjective assessments can be reliable depending on the sampling, right? This one was the old-fashioned long case in the British tradition, and this is the oral exam, very subjective. But if I sample widely across cases and across raters, I find a pretty reliable score. This is good news, because if we wish to assess these complex skills that were on the slide, then we need to rely on professional judgment. That is more subjective, yes. But if you do a good job on sampling, you will get reliability. So you don't need to be afraid of more holistic, more subjective professional judgment. Right? Any comments? Any? No? Okay, good. So the messages that come from that research is that acceptable reliability will only be achieved with substantial sampling. And most of our tests in actual educational practice don't do that. No method, however, is better than any other method. Interestingly, historically, originally we had these methods for clinical assessment, right? And we were dissatisfied with it because they were unreliable. Therefore, Harden in the 70s proposed the OSCE. Look at the title, Objective, Structured, Clinical Examination. He sought to improve the reliability of the OSCE by objectifying, ticking boxes and checklists, and by standardizing. However, many years later now, with a lot more research, we know it's not in the objectification, nor in the standardization, but in the sampling, right? And the OSCE is just as good or bad as our traditional subjective assessments, right? Objectivity is therefore not the same as reliability. So you can have very low reliable outcomes with an objective test and vice versa. You can have reliable outcomes with subjective measures, all depending on your sampling. And many subjective judgments are pretty robust. Okay, that was validity, reliability. We move on to assessment and learning. They say assessment drives learning, and that is true, right? The relationship is pretty complex, but often also the impact is rather negative. Students cramming, memorizing for the occasion. Most of our assessment is very modular. So we have a piece of education. At the end of that, we have a summative test. If you pass it, you can move on to the next module, and you're kind of immune for life, right? Because we won't retest you on it anymore. If you fail, you have to repeat the test. You pass, immune for life. If you fail again, you have to repeat the course. We don't look at what the problem is. We simply retake the test. In practice, in educational practice, I see a lot of poor learning styles of students really preparing and cramming for the test. I can't blame them. That's the way we structured it. There's no more important thing for the student than telling him or her nowadays, what do I have to do to prepare for the test? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the forget curves in psychology, but something that you have learned only for the occasion is gone, 50% is gone within a couple of weeks, right? But this is our model, dominant model of assessment. We give grades. I can tell you that grades are the poorest form of feedback you can get. If you would grade me afterwards, which you will, on a 10-point scale, and you would give me a 7, thank you. But what should I do next time? Yes, get an 8. But the question is how? Grades are meaningless, particularly if we talk about assessing complex skills. You have a 8 for your communication. So what? Right? So grades are pretty meaningless. Yet, most of educational practice is based on grades. Grades also provide little information. So I see a lot of reductionism in assessment systems of, poor learning styles being promoted, not much feedback into the system. There's very little feedback. We hardly look at things longitudinally. Most of our curricula are very modular, not longitudinal. Whereas I think that these complex outcomes that we defined require a longitudinal approach, a much more longitudinal approach. We need to see how people develop over time. And I see a lot of tick box exercises. I mean, nowadays, passing OSCEs is the art of passing OSCEs. Preparing yourself as much as you can, maybe even memorizing the checklist. And I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that even at the postgraduate level. And I'm perplexed by that. So, if I were to summarize our dominant assessment approach, it would be this. Yeah. Right. Some messages, I would say there should be no assessment without feedback, without proper feedback. Learning is all about getting feedback on your performance. And we know that particularly for complex skills, narrative information, words, have a lot more to say than scores or grades. So let's use more narratives in our assessment. Then we've learned through research, lots of research, that the provision of feedback is no guarantee for the use of feedback, and particularly in traditional summative systems. So learners are not inclined to look at feedback when they've passed the test. Who cares? Right? I think that the use of feedback should be supported, should be scaffolded. And we typically do that through the creation of a dialogue around the feedback. And ask learners to self-reflect on the feedback and discuss that with someone. And we need more longitudinal assessment, which is a challenge. Right. So these are some messages from the research. Let's move on to more a theory approach to assessment using these messages. The implications from the validity research is that we need a multitude of different methods. The reliability research tells us we need a lot of sampling. We need to combine information. We need to be very careful with taking high-stake decisions based on small samples. And the learning impact research says that our assessment should be more functional for learning. And that to me is the basis of programmatic assessment. And I'll discuss some basic rules in programmatic assessment, some building blocks. In programmatic assessment, every assessment is just seen as a single data point, right? Nothing more than that. It's one measure. And because one measure really is no measure, we don't take decisions on one measure. We do not pass or fail based on a single measure. Every data point is not optimized for decision making, but optimized for giving feedback. Right? Optimized for learning. Therefore, it should be information rich, either quantitative or qualitative, and it should be meaningful to the learning of the student. And there should be variation in format, I think. I think it's wise to have your learners present over here, analyze over there, discuss over there, synthesize over there, and so on and so forth. in a variety of different formats. Each of these different formats will have a different function. I don't care. I'm kind of agnostic in terms of preference for a method of assessment. I don't care. I only care about your justification for using this particular approach at this particular moment in time in the educational program, and how it aligns with your educational objectives. Then we replace the traditional summative formative distinction by a continuum of stakes. What is at stake? And we can have low stake assessments and higher stake assessment decisions. And I'll elaborate about that. But clearly, the higher the stakes, the more data points you need, the more information you need, right? So there's an issue of proportionality. The data points are related to the stakes of the decision being taken. If it's a very high stake decision, you need a lot of data points. Right, so here's the continuum. Individual assessments are focused on learning, are focused on feedback, not focused on decision making. They're low stake. Then somewhere throughout the year, we have to make an intermediate progress decision. How are you doing? How are you developing? Which areas need more attention? It's still not a high-stake decision because it has no consequences for you to pass or fail. Maybe there are consequences in terms of remediation, but that's it. And then, for example, at the end of the year, for progression to the next year, you need a high-stake decision. And that high-stake decision is based on a lot of data points, on a lot of information. To some extent, you can compare this with pixels in a photograph. If I have a single pixel, I don't see the picture. With adding pixels to the photograph, the image slowly becomes clear. And then we understand what it is, right? When we have a clear picture, we can take a decision. Not really before that. In traditional assessment approaches, we aggregate information within a method. For example, we have an OSCE, and one station is a resuscitation station, and the next station is about bringing bad news to a mother with a child. And the next one is the examination of abdominal complaints. And then we aggregate, we average the information across all stations, and that's your score. I have no idea what the commonality is between resuscitation and bringing bad news to a mother with a child. Therefore, in programmatic assessment, we do not aggregate within a method, but we aggregate across methods towards the skills. So we may take the information on communication from the OSCE and we triangulate it with the information that we have from work-based assessments on communication, right? And at the end of the year, we will look at all that information and see if there's been sufficient growth in all these different areas. Right, so this is kind of the theory of programmatic assessment. I understand it's still rather theoretical. So I'm going to move on to the next part, and I'll give you an illustration of programmatic assessment back home in Maastricht University. Programmatic assessment is moving around the world at the moment and is being implemented in many different places, both at the undergraduate level as well as at the postgraduate level. In Canada, they have all postgraduate training programs have embraced a programmatic assessment as a fundamental part of competency-based medical education. But I will talk about, done something stupidly. Yeah. I will talk about our graduate entry program. We have multiple medical programs. I can tell you more about it later, but this graduate entry program is a 4-year program. And people come in with a relevant bachelor degree. And then they study medicine in 3 years. They have another year, which is for clinical research, right? It's very much a PBL approach with written patient problems in the first year, real clinical patients in the second year. So patients are the starting point of learning in the second year. Clerkship rotations, and then half a year of research into an area of their preference, and half a year of a rotation of their preference. And that may be connected. So if you want to do your research in cardiology and do an internship in cardiology, that is possible. The assessment program is assessment in modules, nothing much new. We might be using a variety of different formats. We might be using multiple choices. We might be using essays, all depending on the preference and the justification for using it. Some of the units have broken up the assessment, so every couple of weeks, you get feedback on the previous weeks. And then we have a lot of longitudinal assessment. For example, in the knowledge domain, we have what we call a progress test. The progress test is a final examination, a comprehensive final examination throughout all the disciplines in the curriculum that is being administered to all the students in the curriculum. So year 1 to year 4 in our undergraduate program, year 1 to year 6, all the students sit the same final exam every 3 months. So 4 times a year, all the students will do a written exam, and we will look at their growth. First year students won't be able to answer many questions correctly, second years a little bit more, and so on and so forth. But we see a nice growth pattern towards graduation. It's very difficult to study for the test. What would you study? Anything could be asked. Every 3 months we design a new test, right? By the way, we do this in collaboration with other medical schools in the country so that we can share the resources. And even benchmark our performance as a medical school. Then we also have a lot of peer evaluation and tutor evaluation on the competencies, right? So if this would be, I'm a tutor, this would be my tutorial group, then I would ask you to fill in a form, which is a very open form, on her professionalism and her professionalism for the next time. And I'll ask you to do it for you and for you. And the next time we will have an evaluation session where we will look at what we have written and whether that aligns to your own self-image. We do a lot of that. We have a very elaborate communication program where students stay in the same group for a whole year. They start to know each other really well. They can give feedback. Then all assessment is informative and low stake, right? We don't pass or fail. The portfolio is the central instrument. So everything that they gather as evidence, they can put into a learning portfolio. It's similar to the patient chart. This is the learner's chart. This is the overview. Here we have the different modules. We have progress tests, 4 times a year. We have all kinds of peer assessment and skills assessment in the skills lab. Then every student is connected to a mentor. We call that counselors. I hate that term because counseling means very different things in English. This is Dunglish, I think, Dutch English. So each student has a mentor, and the mentor has periodic meetings with the student. The student's role is to prepare these meetings by looking at all the evidence, all the data that they have from the assessment system. They have to self-analyze, they have to reflect, and they have to plan. That is being discussed with your mentor, and that's how it functions. And then at the end of the year, we have to take a decision. We take that decision in a group of teachers. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. It's impossible to simply average all the information because the information is quantitative and qualitative. It's impossible to aggregate that in a simple fashion. So the ultimate decision, again, is a professional judgment. And we do that in a group so that the bias can be dealt with. We put a lot of emphasis on feedback, right? So here's an example of quantitative feedback on the progress test, right? Every 3 months, there's a new progress test, and you can log in as a student into the system, and you can see your progress. This is for the total score of a student, but you can also look at your anatomy scores or your physiology scores or your total basic sciences and see how that develops. The computer predicts your future performance based on past performance, right? So you have a very thorough understanding of your knowledge development. For other assessments, we have feedback systems like this, where you have, for the different competencies, you have different assessments. The numbers are behind in brackets, and you can see how you perform in relation to the cohort. We can look at the performance longitudinally. We can click on any dot, and you will get the quantitative and the qualitative information from that data point. One of the most important buttons, I think, on the electronic portfolio is the generation of all narrative feedback. Because you can then read the story of the learner. And you can filter it by competency if you wish, but you quickly get an overview of the performance of an individual, which is rich, which can be used for learning purposes and assessment purposes and decision purposes. Right, the coaching is done by these counselors. This is a very essential element. The mentoring is really important. The students love it. It's very important to promote self-directed learning. I've been in PBL since 1982, and I've learned the paradoxical finding that self-directed learning requires quite a lot of directing. And through the mentoring, this is possible. Then the decision-making is done in a committee, right? You think that's a lot of work. It isn't, because those committees are being prepared, because 95%, 96%, or even more are straightforward decisions. You don't need to discuss, you don't need to deliberate. You do that for those students who need deliberation, right? And then you weigh the arguments. You argue. You build your case. And then you come to a consensus. We use narrative standards for each year of training so that the committee may use those standards in order to arrive at their decisions. But basically, it's a professional judgment. Now it's harnessed in a group, and also you can justify the decision. If you take a certain decision, you have the arguments for it. By the way, if the outcome of the committee decision is a big surprise to the learner, then something has gone wrong in preparing on the way towards that high-stake decision, right? There should be no surprise. Oops, sorry, what have I done? Yeah. We reduce bias by all kinds of strategies that we have derived from qualitative research, so that we rule out bias as much as possible. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but we can pretty much rule biases out. We have introduced the programmatic approach to our graduate entry program, which is 60 students a year, still very feasible. But we've implemented this approach also in our undergraduate master phase, the last 3 years of undergraduate medical training, with 340 students. So that's massive. And we're going to have a full implementation in the bachelor the first 3 years in 2021. Right. I need to finish up, right? The first research, and if you want to read more about it, you can go to my personal homepage, and you'll find a number of publications on programmatic assessment, and the PDFs are there. You can download them and read further if you wish. The findings so far on programmatic assessment, it's all about implementation. It's all about people. The people need to buy into this. The people need to understand it. And here's your challenge. Because you have to convince a lot of people. Right? It's the same as with PBL. If you move from a traditional system towards PBL, you need a mind shift. You need a culture shift. Well, those are not easy to achieve, right? And I know that many of your Spanish schools are relatively traditional, and it's not easy to achieve such a major change. But at least I hope that I've given you a bit of food for thought. I don't expect that you will implement programmatic assessment tomorrow, but hopefully you can take some of those ideas and bring them back to your curricula. It's all about change management, right? I actually think that education and innovation in education is all based on change management. I don't think we have lots of educational theory, lots of educational methodology, but we have to change our teachers, either undergraduate or postgraduate, right? And here's our challenge. This is a big thing, not easy to achieve. As a conclusion, I think that we need to move away from the snapshot approach of individual assessments. We need a more systematic and a more longitudinal approach. And as I said, I don't care about method of assessment, right? We've been moving away from OSCEs, for example, with the increase of work-based assessment that we've implemented, right? We've been moving away from OSCEs in the bachelor phase by increasing teacher-led assessments within the skills lab, within the simulation center, which is connected immediately to feedback. I think professional judgment is imperative. I note an interesting discrepancy. You guys make professional judgments all day long. That is your profession. You have patient information, you have quantitative information, you have qualitative information, and then you make a decision. You do that all the time. Is that decision biased? Yes, it is. Therefore, we have decision support systems, we have guidelines, clinical guidelines, we have AI support in the future, or we have second opinions, right? But we don't take away that professional judgment. And I think we should do the same in assessment. We should reinstate professional judgment again as a fundamental basis for assessing our learners. And I think the subjectivity with that can be dealt with, right? By sampling and by thinking of all kinds of procedural measures to reduce the bias. And I think this programmatic approach integrates both assessment for learning as assessment of learning. It optimizes both the learning function and the decision-making function of assessment. And that's the end of my journey. Right? Now, let me have your astonishments, your questions, your observations, your critical comments. Who? It's always the most difficult to be the first. Yes. Do I use the microphone? Yeah. Would you mind passing the microphone on?
Thank you for the interesting talk. My question is, how many students in each group are in?
For the mentor?
How many students? Sorry, Pilar Garrido, medical oncologist in Madrid, president of the Spanish advisory board for students. My question is related, how many students are involved in each process when speaking about mentoring and counseling? Yeah, but how many for each?
In the one program, 60. In the other program, 340.
Okay.
First one.
No.
The question behind the question is, how do you upscale this? And what are the costs? Right? Yeah.
The question is, how many mentors do we need for 6?
We have.
Sorry, I'm going to answer that question first. My name is Thomas Cobo. I'm the Vice President of the Spanish General Medical Council. And the question I think Pilar want to say is, how many mentors do we need for 60 people? And for the less, how many mentors do we need for 140? All right, 6. That's the question, 1%.
6. So you need 6 mentors. For 340, you need 34.
Right.
So we involve lots of clinicians from the different hospitals in our neighborhood. And they love it. They love to be involved. They like it to have.
And they are paid, aren't they?
The department is paid for education in general, but that doesn't mean anything for the individual clinician, right? So we pay for our clinical education, but that hasn't any consequences for the individual clinical supervisor. The slightly more cynical answer is that we are state funded. We have no more funds than any other school in the Netherlands, right? And you have to stay within the budget. And I think if you would move to something like this, you would have to ask yourself, where do we do what in terms of our education? Where do we spend the money, right? And I actually think that we do spend already quite a lot of money on assessment. But now we're going to redistribute it in a different fashion. Right? And, you know, I hear the same questions about problem-based learning, because it's, you need so many tutors, it's not feasible. But, you know, I've seen problem-based learning, beautiful problem-based learning in South Africa or in Mozambique with very few resources. And they do a good job. It's much more an issue of mindset than of resources.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, kids. I think we are listening to you. I felt I was in a different planet. I mean, not a different part of Europe, but in a completely different planet. We have 4 people that have prepared questions.
Yep.
And so I'm going to ask them. I'm not going to let them to ask the questions. But I will start with one for myself. How much freedom does the dean or whoever is able to, I'm asking on behalf of the deans here, just in case they feel sort of worried to do it. How much freedom do they have to organize a curriculum or an assessment or whatever we are talking about on Maastricht? Considering either the university on one hand and let's say the state rules, if there is any, on the other.
Yeah. When we originally went to programmatic assessment in the graduate entry program, the lawyers said to us we could not do this because the law required to give European credits to each of the assessments. So we originally implemented it where we had individual credits to each individual assessments. Basically, you take decisions, right? This didn't work. So I went to the rector of the university and I said to him, you have to fence your lawyers because we are going to make this innovation. Otherwise it won't work. And he backed me up. And it was also not against the law. And then we re-implemented it, where we now give 60 ECTS points at the end of the year in a single big bang, with the pass-fail decision at the end. And yes, we have the authority, if you wish, to do that. However, it's all about human beings. It's all about how do you get people so far to make that change. I never worried about students. Students are young, are bright. You have the best of the best anyway in medicine. They will do fine despite your education. They get the hang of it very quickly. I worry much more about teachers, right? And they often, the problem with many deans is that a lot of our education is in silos. Yeah. And it's very difficult to touch those silos. Therefore, it's very difficult to govern education in most medical schools, right? But if I can actually recommend it to you, because it creates a lot of stuff and a lot of creativity if you make a major change. But I'm not sure if you can pull it off.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, las 4 personas, again, back to Spanish. Las 4 discusores que han llamado a Arkadi, que han hecho preguntas y que creo que todo el mundo las tiene, por lo tanto no voy a leerlas y algunas las vamos a orientar de alguna otra forma, pero básicamente lo que quería decir es que en cinco puntos voy a decir lo que quizá considerado los puntos más importantes de lo que considera una evaluación programática para centrar un poco la discusión. Una está basada en gran cantidad de información. Otra está basada en juicios de valor. La otra en feedback. El otro en que es longitudinal. ¿Vale? Y en la utilización de métodos diferentes. Con lo cual, cuando pienso, ¿cuántas son? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. En 6, son 6 puntos que están en el otro extremo del planeta, como decía antes, con lo que hacemos nosotros. Y dentro de lo que podemos hacer, aquí la legalidad y la administración en general nos come por arriba, por abajo, por izquierda y por derecha, y es muy difícil hacerlo. Y realmente, como ellos han dicho, en cierta medida se enfrentaron un poco a los abogados que decían que no se podía hacer. Los abogados viven de que las cosas no se puedan hacer o se puedan hacer, y prueba de ello es el papelito que nos ha dado Arcadia aquí, que es 1,5 folios para que digamos que sí que nos pueden grabar. Entonces, dentro de eso, de las preguntas que hay, yo diría, la primera sería, ¿se puede empezar a hacer una evaluación programática a una escala pequeñita de feedback, de múltiples métodos? Ya estamos usando distintos métodos, pero en general se utiliza la ECOE por un lado, o los multiple choice por otro, o los size, pero no combinamos, como decías tú, está separado en bloques lo que usamos, ¿no? Sin ninguna realmente en línea de continuidad. Creemos que se puede hacer en este país, en España, una evaluación programática o empezar a una pequeña escala, a un pequeño nivel. Tienen 360 alumnos, que tampoco son poquitos, ¿no? Nosotros, ¿cuántos tenemos? Bueno, si quitamos repetidores, porque esa es otra, aquí se pasa de curso o no se pasa de curso. Aquí hay gente en sexto que va a la graduación y le quedan asignaturas de segundo. O sea, que es que vivimos en otro mundo diferente, por lo tanto hay que adaptar tanta cosa que parece un poco difícil, ¿no? Pero bueno, aquí nos vamos a dedicar al quién y al cómo, que son las dos preguntas que corresponde aquí. Por lo tanto, en principio, podríamos decir que quién podría hacer estas evaluaciones o quién podría empezar. Podríamos empezar con tutores o con mentores, como ha dicho él, independientemente de las funciones que le damos. Y debe ser la persona que ha impartido la docencia o la clínica la que lo debe hacer, o tiene que ser otra persona diferente. Por ejemplo, si queréis empezamos por un poco el quién. Cualquier pregunta es bienvenida, ¿vale? Yo hago esas que nos han pasado los 4 discursores, que son Pablo Lara, que es el presidente de la Conferencia de Decanos y decano de Málaga, Antonio Compán, que es el decano, mi decano, el de la Facultad de Medicina de la Universidad Miguel Hernández. Los dos además están en la Conferencia de Decanos. Luego está Jesús Millán, que es catedrático de Medicina Interna y vicedecano de la Complutense de Madrid. Y luego está Roger, saluda, que es profesor de la Francisca de Victoria en Madrid también. Entonces, las preguntas que yo hago son las que en realidad han hecho ellos y que todos tenéis en vuestro librito, papelitos o lo que sea. Entonces, yo preguntaría lo primero, y no sé, aquí si queréis o si alguien quiere decir algo, ¿debe ser el mismo profesor, suponemos, el que haga la evaluación, que eso nos lo podemos aplicar a nosotros también? ¿Debe ser el mismo profesor de cirugía el que enseña y el que evalúa, o el mismo profesor de fisiología o de medicina interna el que evalúa y el que enseña? Tengo que decir, votos a favor. Votos a favor. Kiss, do you think that it should be the same teacher, professor, the one that's, I mean, we are down to Spain, okay? Forget about Maastricht. So come down to earth. So it should be the same person, the one that teaches or either clinical teaching or basic sciences, and the one that does the assessment of the students. I'm not talking about the linear up and down, but just some more basic normal evaluations. It should be the same person?
Sure. Why not? Why would it not be?
No, I mean, you are using a committee, for example, for the evaluation.
Yeah, but that's for the high-stake decision.
We are using a person.
Yes, but as you know, a single person will be biased because it's only a single opinion, right? So that won't be that trustworthy.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. But what do you think? You think that we are impartial to a certain extent when?
I found quite difficult the role of the mentor in this process.
Right.
Roger Ruiz, Universidad Francisco de Vitoria. I find quite difficult the role of the mentor in this process because in my experience, if the mentor is involved in some way in the high stakes decision, the relationship with the mentoree will be different.
Yeah, definitely.
So how do you deal with this?
So you separate those roles, right? So the mentor follows the student throughout all the years.
Yeah.
You're building a trusted relationship with the student, but you don't pass or fail the student.
But you are a very important assessor of this committee. No, if you're in the committee, you're not the assessor. Okay.
And in order to make it feasible in the big master program, we have the mentors also being the committee, but if your student is going to be discussed, you don't have any role other than maybe adding information.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But we protect the role of the mentor, otherwise your relationship with the student will change.
Absolutely.
And the whole idea is to make a trusted relationship. I also think this is very beneficial for all the stress and the burnout that we see among medical students and residents.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the data, it's really scary. About 25% of the students are at the verge of burning out.
Mm.
And you know, I think it's because we put this enormous stress on them of, you know, moving from one exam to the other exam and so on and so forth. Mm. It's very punitive. Our system is punitive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I continue? Another thing that I am concerned about this is what are which are the professor, the teachers that are involved in the committee of, because mainly of them, most of them, I guess, will be clinicians, or not?
No,
not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Could also be basic scientists.
All of them should have an idea of competence very similar in this way, and this could be a problem because competency is not easy to know what it is.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, for example, a clinician will have an idea about competency different from what could think a basic science professor, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So this will be interesting to how do you deal with this?
We don't, because it's difficult to standardize everyone.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's needed. I think that if you are a basic scientist, you can even see how students are doing in their clinical years, and if there are certain areas that need improvement or not. The whole issue is data triangulation. Yeah, you look at patterns. Yeah? So the triangulation part is really important. And yes, it's a human thing, But I think the old way of trying to standardize everything and objectifying everything, we're throwing things away with the bathwater. We throw the baby away with the bathwater. And it's because we're, I'm looking for the right English word, we're so inclined, obsessed really, with objectivity. Everything needs to be objective. But in your clinical practice, not everything is being objective. It can be, right? Why should it be in education?
Sí. Pablo Lara, Dean of Málaga and President of the Spanish Conference of Deans of School of Medicine. Thank you very much. Mila has said that you are in another planet. I would say that it's another galaxy, at least.
Well, there are many more stars in our galaxy.
Yeah. And then I would like to receive from you some advices, basic advices, because our situation is really different. We have a large number of students in each group. We are few.
Like what? How many?
Well, say 120.
To me, that's small.
That's small. Oh,
you can.
Tell me how to do that.
You can do anything you like with 120. Whoa! I wish we had 120.
The number of professors is not enough. Our subject depends mainly of only one area of knowledge, and each subject has a number, a qualification, a mark, and the culture of number is very much present in the School of Medicine. Yeah. To get a place in a School of Medicine, it depends only of the results in theoretical exams. The future of the work as medical doctor depends on the mirror and exam mirror. And it's a theoretical exams.
Guys, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You make the system.
I try to do my best, but it's not enough.
Then change it.
But and the teaching is not integrated. How to start with?
Well, if we would produce cars in the same way, we would have very unsafe cars. You know. That's my issue of governance, right? In the old system, we had individual departments and individual teachers doing their thing. In more modern education programs, you align things, right? And people have to talk to each other, which is already a challenge, right? But there's more governance on the curriculum. And this is hard to get in any medical school.
My name is Antonio Compain, the Dean of University Miguel Hernández. I completely agree with the personal journey of Professor Van Vleuten. Thank you very much for your presentation, and also for the presentation of the Professor Gual, for the Professor Arcadi Gual. I think it's the best way to start this seminar. It's very important. The problem are that Pablo and me, we are dean. And we have a lot of problems, like you, with the professor, with the students, with the governments, with the laws, and so on. But this is not the best way in order to start a programmatic assessment. The programmatic assessment is perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect because you have explained perfectly. If you have 100 examinations, it's better than one examination. It's better, it's obviously. The problem is that we must start in our universities, possibly the best way is not to change all at the same times.
Yeah.
The best is step by step, with maybe in one major or maybe in another subject or so on. But more important for me is the necessary political consensus of the staff.
Yes.
And the students.
Yes.
Because, for example, here in Spain, it's very important the examination in order to enter in the training program of specialization.
Yes.
And I don't completely sure that the students prefers this type of assessment that's the actual.
Not before, but in hindsight they do.
Possibly, it was different if this programmatic assessment was not only in the undergraduate, also in graduate and in continue. I think it's my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. I completely agree with you. I've been long in problem-based learning, right? And if I take that as an analogy, it's equally difficult to change a classic school to a PBL school. And it's all about getting the right politics and getting the people to understand. In my view, I think that we should train our teachers a lot more. Which discipline do you have?
Surgery.
Surgery. If I would take over your surgery clinic tomorrow morning, I would have a lot of accidents and patient safety would be,
Right.
However, you're taught to become a surgeon. The day after, you're in an educational program and you're able to teach. You have no knowledge of educational theory, of all the evidence out there. You're totally oblivious. What kind of practice is that? And I think that to teach, we should be qualified to teach. Yeah. And I think,
Then most of the people that are here agree because we are the convinced ones, basically.
Yeah.
So that's
But it
easy.
has to start somewhere. It has to start. Great that deans are here. Deans can be very powerful.
We are trying to convince them from the Spanish society that they have to implement in their schools teachers training programs with the Society for Medical Education will be of charge in running them.
I've seen many PBL implementations. You don't need to convince me about the value of PBL. It's a very strong approach. But I also have seen PBL implementations fail. Simply because there was no buy-in to carry it out. Then your issue about evolutionary steps. In my experience, revolutionary approaches have more sustainability than evolutionary approaches. But revolutionary approaches are more difficult to achieve. So I'm much in favor of also an evolutionary approach. We were discussing on the board communication, and communication in your school is now a longitudinal line, right? Think along programmatic ways in order to evaluate that. And then you have an excellent partial implementation of it. Yeah.
I agree.
You are Cali. No, he has one.
I have a very short, and I think that is the question. Is a portfolio absolutely necessary for programmatic evaluation?
Yes, I think so. I think it's the chart, right?
Then is it necessary? Can you recommend to the deans that they implemented the portfolio?
No, because it's just a side thing, the portfolio. It's important to implement. It's first, you have to convince the people. It's first about your political, your political zone of proximal development, right? And that's the first thing. The e-portfolio there are many vendors, you can easily buy it. And originally we did it on paper, it worked as well, not as good as electronically, but the portfolio is not the thing. It's important, but it's not the essential element.
Okay. When you said that you were doing the same exam, or the same evaluation or assessment throughout the 6 years, and the same one was for first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 6 year. So how do you build those? Do you increment the difficulty or that, or
the standard is increasing every time. Yeah. And we do that now together because I travel a fair amount. I see systems such as the Spanish system with the MIR and everything very much driven by the standardized exams. The need to account to society, to account quality to a society. But we have been taking a different pathway in the Netherlands by having this progress test together with other medical schools, because the test is not about Maastricht medicine, it's just about medicine. And so we have invited other schools to participate. And at the moment, some 12,000 students sit the same test at the same time in the Netherlands. The 2 finalists, we have 8 medical schools in the Netherlands. 2 are not joining, are not in the collaboration at the moment, but they will join within 2 years. And what we'll have achieved then is a national exam on knowledge, which is very beneficial for the individual learner because you get a lot of feedback, beneficial to the individual school because you can benchmark your performance against the rest, and at a very low cost because we do it collaboratively, and it's all school-owned. It's us having taken the responsibility to demonstrate also to the public that our learners are up to par.
Maybe we can join them with a couple of schools. I mean, why not? I mean, the couple of schools that want to be innovative will be a good excuse for a dean. I mean, I say, oh, we are going to join Maastricht, and then we are going to start this way.
You're more than welcome to join us.
Maybe it will work. I mean, we took your model to a very small scale when we started in 1981 in Alicante. It was a reduced version of that because we couldn't implement PBL completely. So we sort of coordinate things like that. So to the deans or to the other people that are here, maybe that's a possibility.
Why could you not implement PBL?
Because we didn't have teachers. We ran a course for teachers training before. We got the physicians of the area, and then we gave a course on teachers training, so they knew at that time what was an objective, a competency, an exam, that kind of thing. So basic also, but at least we could communicate with them. And we didn't have the infrastructure. We didn't, I mean, the how you call it, the things that with the students were the name and things like that. They were in one of my shoes boxes. Okay. So, I mean, we couldn't go that far. We went a bit farther than that, but we couldn't go that far. The problem, I think you said, well, I give the microphone, is that it's people.
It's people.
And then here the problem is that the teachers or the professors or the chairs of that, they are absolutely independent. And usually they don't want anybody to tell them what to do or how to do it.
Yes, but you have to report to the dean.
Oh, they would love that.
Thanks. I'm Jose Repullo from the Spanish Foundation for Continuous Training, the medical organization.
Right.
You mentioned in Canada that there were the possibility of helping different universities, faculties of medicine, for these progress exams or different activities, just because of the cost of these activities is very complicated for doing one university alone. Can you tell something more about that? Because one of the difficult issues is that putting in operation this type of assessment probably is very difficult for every one of the faculties of medicine.
Question of clarification. Do you mean the progress test?
Yes.
Right. This is in the Netherlands, not in Canada.
Oh,
And in Canada, they have adopted programmatic assessment in their postgraduate training programs. But the progress test has been originally developed by Maastricht because of educational reasons, because it was an answer in the quest for the self-directed learning that we wanted the students to do. And we had originally a traditional end-of-unit test. So the students, instead of self-directing them, went for the test. By introducing progress tests, that relationship was broken. So the students couldn't study for the test anymore. Now, it would be very easy to help you to set up something. I'm also part of a European organization, European Board of Medical Assessors, and we actually help medical schools to set up progress testing system. You can either use questions that we deliver, or you can produce your own questions. The underlying thing around progress testing is that it requires governance again, right? It requires the fact that you have a central development of questions. And this is in conflict with the silos and the independence of the individual teachers, right? Because we develop questions from different disciplines, and then we ask other disciplines to review those questions to improve the quality. And that's a central organization, which is very difficult to achieve in many schools for the same governance issue.
You mentioned the importance of...
Pablo, name.
Again?
Yes.
Pablo Lara, again. You mentioned the importance of qualitative assessment, but it consumes a lot more of time. And it's very difficult to convert in a number.
Well, why would you want to convert that into a number?
Yeah, I know that, but because students are interested in the number,
No. Yeah. We educate the students to be interested in the numbers.
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a big change to convert that culture.
Yeah.
I have an optional subject with 12 students. I don't need to pass them any exam. But in the large group, again, quantitative assessment are people more quiet. I mean, people ask now for 0.1.
Don't go there.
Yeah, but it happens. Well, that's a comment I would like to have.
That's how we train our students.
Yeah, absolutely. But they are training majority from our teachers in this way. No, when they go to the university, but before.
If we accept this, we will never change.
Yeah, but that's our situation. And the second comment is...
I disagree with you.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
but I am telling you how things are.
I know. I've been around the world. I know how things are.
The second comment, very briefly, is I would like to know your opinion on the present and the future of electronic assessment.
Yeah. What do you consider electronic assessment?
Well, there are very different methods. We were talking before about the ESCRIT project with medical clinical simulator, by instance.
Yeah, we will see a lot more technology in the future. I have a PhD student from the United States who is looking at clinical process measures for residents. Because in the US, they have everything in the computer. Every individual actor is in the computer, in the electronic health record. And the question is, can we data mine the electronic health record to find performance measures on an individual resident? And the data are pretty positive. So in the future, we might have clinical performance dashboards that may inform our clinical performance, potentially. Simulation is going pretty, strong. In our new bachelor program that will start in 2021, all module tests will be stored in a computer, and it's up to the student to sign up for a test. I've studied a part of physiology, I want to test it. And the computer will generate a test on physiology. It's up to the student, we don't grade, but it's for the information of the student. So we'll use a lot more technology. The electronic portfolio is quite interesting because that's also a very interesting pile of data. And we're doing now AI type of research to make sense out of the narrative data. We can distill moods and signals out of the narrative data. It will take quite a few years of further research, but we'll see a lot more technology.
Okay.
Beatriz, physiology professor of the Universidad Europea de Madrid and secretary of the CEDEM.
Okay.
Thanks very much for your talk. I really have a very good fun listening to you. And I agree with you that the main problem is convincing our teachers, not the students. And I really feel very curious how you go through the process of convincing all the teachers first of the PBL system and nowadays do the programmatic assessment.
Yeah.
Is, I don't know, training or talking to them, or what's the key point?
Well, let me describe. We're going to. I could give a long story about how we went about in all kinds of curricular changes over the years, but we typically tend to change things over the years. Every change brings new elan, new spirit. We are going to renew the bachelor program for 2021, and there's a redesign group. And the redesign group is thinking about a completely new system of training. But at the same time, we're involving faculty to think along with us. This is the broad idea. And we have so-called co-create sessions. It's based on design thinking. And so faculty come in and we say, we have this is the overall plan, but we have this particular problem. Come and help us resolve this problem. And we have a whole bunch of these co-create sessions. The teachers will have a new role in the new program. And therefore we invite the teachers, beginning of next year, to help design the program. So they feel ownership over the program. So that's a step-by-step approach. Yeah.
Jordi Palés, Medical Education Foundation. As you know, our medical schools in Spain are very traditional medical schools with a non-integrated curriculum. My question is possible to implement a programmatic assessment in medical school with non-integrated curriculum, or it's really necessary to have an integrated curriculum to implement in an effective manner the programmatic assessment?
Now, I think the classic approach to education is a very knowledge-based mastery approach to education. We pour in the knowledge with every discipline, and we test it, see if they understood it, and then the next. There's a lot of educational research that this is not an effective strategy of learning. And one of the biggest problems in education is the issue of transfer of learning, right? So we tend to think that we pour in the knowledge, that the learner is able to transfer that knowledge into professional situations and be able to apply it to it. That is not the case. It's a very fundamental problem. Therefore, modern education programs are more integrated and provide more authentic tasks, right, as a starting point for the learning. That is to reduce the transfer gap that we have in most curricula. Those modern approaches to education are, with a fancy term, called more constructivist, right? Learners have to construct the knowledge, right? Not we pour it in, but learning is not so much about information transmission, but about information comprehension, right? And the learner has to construct that. And if you don't accept that kind of a strategy for education, then programmatic assessment has no place. Right? So any form of more integrated constructivist approach to education will work. I think it works beautifully in graduate education, because a lot of learning in the workplace is already, many of the elements are already there, and it's more easy to implement it in postgraduate education. But in the traditional system, I always make 4 generations of curricula that we have. You described the first generation, the old-fashioned lecture-based, discipline-based curriculum. Then the second generation of curricula are the integrated curricula, mostly often systems integrated. Difficult because that requires governance, that requires teachers to talk to each other. Thirdly, our problem-based curriculum. Now we change the instructional format fundamentally, the didactic approach differently. And the fourth generation are competency-based programs, which competency-based programs. So if you're still at level 1,
that's right,
then there's
a problem.
There's a few things to achieve.
To solve.
But it all starts with the realization of the problem.
Yeah.
Being aware of where medical education might go.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have 2 minutes,
Okay.
so before Arkady cuts my throat. And I only have 1, so I have to keep it. And I just want to thank you for all your
You're welcome.
explanations. And as I said, we are,
All the way from the other galaxy.
We are on the other galaxy, the farther one that exists. There we are. You are in one, we are in the other one. I don't know how many 100 million years light we are from. So, but anyway, I have always been an optimist, and I think you have to start somewhere. I think we lost a great opportunity with the Bologna. We had a great excuse to introduce all these kinds of things. And at the end, we ended up with the same thing we had before. 10 hours lecture was 1 ECT, one for most schools, which is a great change, innovation. And, but I mean, we started a program that was illegal in 1982, based on you. So it was illegal. And even the Director General of the Ministry of Education came and said, but I shouldn't be knowing that because that's illegal. And I said, yeah, it's so beautiful that you need to know it. So I think the problem is to convince not the deans, but the people that are under the deans. But I think we have to go through the students mainly, because the students are most flexible than the teachers. And I think they are more convincible. So maybe you can start as an example, just the pass-fail system instead of grading by degrees. And if the first year you pass almost all of them, then the next year all of them will put for that. So you have to use maybe certain tricks to be able to get the students there. So thank you to all of you. I think it has been very interesting. At least I got a lot of ideas, difficult to implement in the Spanish system, which is highly regulated by some bodies outside the medical schools. But as my mother used to say, if you don't try, you never succeed. So thank you very much to all of you. And 5:30.
Great. Okay.